The most feared man in Asia just fell to his knees. Not before a rival kingpin, not before a government official, but before a 70-year-old janitor with Alzheimer's who doesn't even know where he is. His name is Junho. They call him the God of Death. He dismantled 3 rival syndicates in one night without a wrinkle in his suit. His mansion operates under one unbreakable law. No one enters the master's private sanctum. Ever. The penalty? Death. But tonight, that rule was broken. A terrified maid named Maya is sprinting through forbidden corridors, searching for her grandfather Elijah, a confused old man who's wandered into the one place he should never be, the Great Hall. When Junho storms in, drenched in blood from his latest war, he finds an intruder. He raises his pistol. The red laser dot settles on the old man's forehead. His finger tightens on the trigger. Then Elijah holds out a scorched wooden box and whispers, "You forgot this, little soldier." The gun falls. The devil kneels. Why? The answer lies in a fire that started 30 years ago, and a debt that can only be paid in blood. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to help support the channel. To understand the weight of that silence, you have to understand the terror that preceded it. Just 10 minutes earlier, the mansion was quiet. Maya was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the grout of the grand foyer until her fingers were raw. She wasn't supposed to be there this late, and she certainly wasn't supposed to have company. But life had dealt her a cruel hand. Elijah's nurse had quit that morning without notice, leaving Maya with a choice: leave her grandfather alone in their drafty apartment or smuggle him into the safest and most dangerous house in Seoul. She had hidden him in the servants' pantry with a warm blanket and a thermos of tea, telling him it was a game of hide-and-seek. "Stay here, Papa," she had whispered. "Don't move until I come back." But Alzheimer's doesn't play by the rules. While Maya was focused on a stubborn wine stain, the pantry door creaked open. By the time she turned around, Elijah was gone. Her stomach dropped through the floor. She found him standing in the center of the forbidden Great Hall, staring up at the vaulted ceiling, muttering to ghosts from his past. "Papa, we have to go now," Maya hissed, grabbing his arm. That was when the heavy oak doors swung open, and the devil of Seoul walked in. Junho brought the storm inside with him, the smell of rain mixed with the metallic tang of fresh blood. He stopped mid-stride, his eyes locking onto the strangers in his sanctuary. The temperature in the room plummeted. This wasn't a man, it was a predator interrupting a meal. Maya didn't think. She threw herself between the monster and the old man. "Please," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "He doesn't know where he is, he's sick. I'll take him away, I swear you'll never see us again." Junho didn't speak. He just walked forward, the wet slap of his shoes on marble echoing like a countdown. His face was a mask of cold indifference. Elijah, oblivious to the lethal danger, squinted through the gloom. He looked at the younger man, then down at the crimson stains coating Junho's knuckles. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps delusion, crossed his face. He shook his head, a disappointed tusk-tusk sound escaping his lips. "Boy," Elijah scolded, his voice trembling but stern. "You didn't wash up for dinner again, look at you, you're a mess." The air left the room. The 6 bodyguards behind Junho stiffened, their hands flying to their holsters. In their world, men had been skinned alive for looking at the boss the wrong way. This old man had just scolded him like a child. Lieutenant Kang, the head of security, stepped forward, his weapon raised. "Boss, give the word." Junho raised a hand to stop him. He stepped over the weeping maid, closing the distance until he was towering over Elijah. He raised the pistol, pressing the cold steel barrel right against the center of the old man's chest. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, her breath hitching in her throat as she heard the distinct, mechanical click of the hammer pulling back. The world held its breath, but the trigger finger didn't move. Junho's eyes, usually dead and flat as a shark, narrowed. They weren't looking at the old man's face anymore. They were locked onto his forearm. Elijah's sleeve had ridden up when he raised the wooden box, revealing a jagged, ugly scar, a raised welt of keloid skin that ran from his elbow to his wrist. In an instant, The marble hall of soul vanished. Junho was 7 years old again. Lowe's Angels. April 29, 1992. The sky was choked with black smoke. The smell of burning rubber and gasoline was suffocating. He was alone, separated from his parents in the chaos of the riots, trapped in a dead-end alley behind their burning grocery store. 3 looters had cornered him, wielding iron pipes and broken bottles. The little boy had squeezed his eyes shut, just like Maya was doing now, waiting for the pain. But the blow never landed on the boy. A shadow had fallen over him. A massive figure in a private security uniform stepped between the child and the mob. Elijah. He didn't speak, he just acted. He raised his arm to block a crowbar swing meant for the boy's skull. Crack. The sound of bone breaking was sickening enough to make the attackers pause. But Elijah didn't drop. He didn't even scream. He roared, swinging a baton with his good arm, driving the attackers back into the smoke with the ferocity of a wounded bear. He scooped the boy up with his broken arm, ignoring the agony. "I got you, little soldier," he had wheezed, blood dripping down his sleeve. "I got you." The memory hit Junho like a physical blow. The gun in his hand felt suddenly heavy, obscene. He reached out with his free hand, his trembling fingers tracing the raised ridges of that same scar on the old man's arm. The skin was older now, weathered and paper-thin, but the shape was unmistakable. It was the map of his survival. The god of death, mask shattered. The man who had ordered executions without blinking let out a shuddering breath. "Soldier," Junho whispered, the word barely audible. It was the nickname the man had given him during those 3 days they hid in the shelter. Tears, hot and unbidden, spilled over Junho's cheeks. The bodyguards exchanged nervous glances. They had never seen the boss blink, let alone cry. Lieutenant Kang lowered his weapon slightly, confusion marring his face. "Boss, who is he?" Junho didn't wipe the tears away. He turned to his men, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. "Kang," Junho said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Anyone who stands while this man is standing dies today." The threat hung in the air, absolute and terrifying. In one fluid motion, the entire room dropped. 6 hardened killers and the devil of soul hit the floor, bowing their heads to the confusion of a janitor who just wanted to give a boy his box back. By sunrise, the hierarchy of the soul underworld had been rewritten. The master suite, a room previously forbidden to everyone but Junho and his rotating string of high-class escorts, now smelled like menthol balm and old paper. Elijah was installed in the king-sized bed, surrounded by silk sheets he complained were too slippery. The man who controlled 70% of the city's narcotics trade was currently sitting on the edge of the mattress, blowing on a spoonful of porridge. "Open up," Junho murmured, his voice softer than anyone had heard in 2 decades. Elijah blinked, the fog of dementia momentarily parting. He looked at the Mafia Don, then at the spoon. "I can feed myself, Private," he grumbled, though his hands shook too violently to hold the utensil. "And sit up straight. You look like a question mark." Thwack. Elijah's cane cracked against Junho's shoulder. The bodyguards standing by the door flinched. They expected violence. They expected the old man to lose a hand. Instead, the devil of soul straightened his spine, swallowed his pride, and whispered, "Yes, sir." But the real test came 3 days later. The boardroom was thick with cigar smoke. 3 of the region's most vicious distribution heads sat across from Junho, negotiating a territorial truce. Tension was razor-thin. One wrong word meant war. The heavy mahogany doors creaked open. The conversation died. Elijah shuffled in, wearing mismatched flannel pajamas and one slipper. He looked small, fragile, and utterly lost. He walked right past the bewildered crime lords, seemingly unaware that he was interrupting a negotiation worth millions. He stopped at Junho's side and tugged on the sleeve of the Italian suit. "Boy," Elijah rasped, loud enough for the room to hear. "They hid the strawberry ice cream again, the one with the real chunks." One of the rival bosses. A scarred man named Cutter sneered. He reached into his jacket, his eyes locked on the senile intruder. "Who is this clown? Is this a joke, Junho?" The sound of a knife slamming into wood echoed like a gunshot. Junho had driven a combat dagger through the solid oak table, missing Cutter's hand by a millimeter. The room froze. Junho didn't look at the knife. He looked at Cutter, his eyes black pits of absolute malice. "He wants strawberry," Junho said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "If you upset him, if you raise your voice, if you so much as breathe too loudly, I will burn your entire lineage to the ground." Cutter slowly withdrew his hand. "Get the man his ice cream," Junho ordered his lieutenant. While the mansion adjusted to its new, strange peace, the city outside was not so forgiving. Across town, in a warehouse that smelled of rust and dried blood, a phone rang. The Viper, Junho's deadliest rival, picked up. "It's true," the voice on the other end whispered. "The devil has gone soft. He's playing nursemaid to a ghost." The Viper smiled, showing gold-capped teeth. He looked at a surveillance photo of Junho pushing a wheelchair in his garden. "A man with a heart is a man with a weakness," the Viper said, loading a fresh magazine into his pistol. "Prepare the team. Tonight we take the crown." Inside the fortress, the greatest threat wasn't the enemy at the gates. It was the doubt festering in the heart of the guard. Lieutenant Kang had served Junho for 7 years. He had killed for him, bled for him, and risen to become the head of security because he respected strength above all else. But as he watched the god of death wipe oatmeal from an old man's chin, that respect turned to ash. The kneeling, the ice cream, the softness, it wasn't just embarrassing. To Kang, it was a death sentence for the organization. Maya was the first to notice the shift. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. The mansion was no longer a cage, but a home. Yet, whenever she turned a corner, she felt eyes boring into her. She would catch Kang standing in the shadows, staring at Elijah not with the respect ordered by the boss, but with the cold, calculating disgust one reserves for a parasite. Elijah, though lost in the fog of his own mind, still carried the instincts of a man who had survived a war. One afternoon, while Junho was reading the newspaper to him in the sunroom, Elijah suddenly stopped rocking in his chair. The hazy look in his eyes sharpened into steel. He pointed a trembling finger toward the doorway where Kang had just exited. "Private," Elijah whispered, his voice dropping an octave. "I'm here, soldier," Junho replied, closing the paper. "That one," Elijah said, tapping his temple. "He walks quiet, too quiet. He has the eyes of a jackal waiting for the lion to sleep. Watch your 6. Junho sighed, patting the old man's hand gently. He saw only the paranoia of a sickness, not the wisdom of a veteran. "Kang is family, Halmoni. He would die for me. You're safe here. No one can touch you." It was the first mistake Junho had made in a decade, and it would be his costliest. That night, while the mansion slept under the false security of peace, Kang stood on the rear balcony. The rain hammered against his suit, masking the sound of his voice. He held a burner phone to his ear, staring out at the perimeter wall, the wall he controlled. "It's done," Kang said into the receiver. "The old man has made him weak. He's not fit to lead." On the other end of the line, the Viper laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "And the gate." "Midnight," Kang replied, checking his watch. "I'll disable the sensors in the east wing, make it quick. I want the throne, but I don't want to watch the slaughter." "Midnight," the Viper agreed. "The king is dead." Kang hung up and tossed the phone into the dark, wet garden below. Inside, the clock on the wall ticked toward 12:00. The shield was about to fall. The rain lashed against the bulletproof glass of the study, counting down the seconds to a midnight that Junho didn't know was coming. In the silence of the room, the battered wooden box that Elijah had carried into the hall sat on the mahogany desk like a holy relic. For days, Junho had been too afraid to open it. He feared it might just be trash, the hoarding of a sick mind. But tonight, guided by a ghost of nostalgia, he lifted the lid. There was no gold inside, no jewelry, no money. There were only scraps of paper preserved like treasures. On top lay a faded Polaroid from 1992. It showed a younger, stronger Elijah, smiling with a bruised arm, his hand resting on the shoulder of a skinny, terrified Korean boy. Junho picked it up, his thumb brushing over his own 7-year-old face. Underneath the photo was a stack of letters, carbon copies, dozens of them. Junho unfolded the top one, dated 1995. It was addressed to the International Red Cross. To whom it may concern, I am looking for a boy. His name is Junho. His uncle took him back to Seoul. He is small for his age and he gets scared of the thunder. Please, he has no one else. I promised I would keep him safe. Please find my soldier. Junho's breath hitched. He had spent 30 years thinking he was abandoned, hardening his heart into stone to survive the underworld. But all that time, across an ocean, a janitor in Detroit had been writing letters into the void, desperate to find him. Elijah hadn't just saved him once, he had spent a lifetime trying to save him again. He never stopped looking, a soft voice said. Junho looked up. Maya was standing in the doorway, holding a tray of tea. Her eyes were red from crying. Junho stood up, the letter still clutched in his hand. The distance between them, the chasm between Mafia Don and Maid, vanished instantly. He didn't come here to die, Maya, Junho said, his voice thick with emotion. He came here to come home. He looked at her, his expression fierce and protective. You are done cleaning, you are done hiding, you aren't the help anymore, you're my sister, and he is the patriarch of this house. Maya nodded, a sob escaping her throat. For the first time, the mansion felt warm. Then, the grandfather clock in the hall struck 12. Click. The warmth vanished. The lights in the study died instantly, plunging them into pitch blackness. A split second later, the room was bathed in a sinister, pools-ing crimson glow as the emergency power kicked in. A computerized voice, cold and devoid of mercy, echoed through the speakers. System failure. East wing DACTAVATD. Perimeter BRACHED. Junho looked at Maya, the blood draining from his face. The box was still open on the desk, but the time for memories was over. The wolves were inside. The red emergency lights pulsed like a dying heartbeat, casting long, grotesque shadows against the walls. But the true horror wasn't the alarm. It was the silence that followed. Outside, the massacre was efficient and absolute. With the perimeter sensors disabled by Kang, the Viper's mercenaries didn't have to sneak in. They walked in. The loyal bodyguards stationed at the east wing never saw it coming. There were no shouts, no gunfights, just the hiss of suppressed rounds and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the wet pavement. Inside, Junho didn't run for the armory. He didn't run for the safe room. He sprinted toward the master suite. Halmoni! Junho screamed, kicking the double doors open with enough force to splinter the wood. The room was empty. The bed was unmade, the sheets cold. The medical monitor was overturned on the floor, its wires torn. Elijah was gone. A scream tore through the corridor behind him. No, let me go. Junho spun around and sprinted back into the main hallway. He skidded to a halt, his breath seizing in his chest. The corridor was blocked. 10 men clad in black tactical gear stood in a semicircle, their assault rifles raised, the laser sights painting a constellation of red dots on Junho's chest. He was unarmed, helpless, a king without a sword. In the center of the kill squad stood Lieutenant Kang. He wasn't aiming at Junho. He had one arm wrapped tight around Maya's neck, the barrel of his pistol pressed hard against her temple. Maya was sobbing, her eyes wide with terror, her feet barely touching the ground as Kang hoisted her up. Let her go, Kang, Junho said, his voice dangerously low. This is between you and me. Kang shook his head, a look of twisted pity on his face. There is no you and me anymore, boss. There is only the organization, and you broke it. I made us kings, Junho snarled, stepping forward. Stay back, Kang shouted, jamming the gun harder into Maya's skull. He gestured to the empty hallway. Look at you. You were the devil of soul. Now look at you. Running around in the dark, scared for a maid and a ghost. Kang cocked the hammer of his pistol. The sound echoed through the red-lit hall. You traded your empire for a senile old man, Kang spat, his finger tightening on the trigger. Now you die with him. Junho tensed, preparing to lunge, preparing to die if it meant taking a bullet for her. A gunshot rang out, loud and thunderous. Junho didn't fall. Maya didn't scream. To Kang's left, one of the elite mercenaries suddenly jerked backward, a spray of red mist erupting from his shoulder. He crumpled to the floor, writhing in agony. The hallway froze. Kang spun around, eyes searching the darkness at the far end of the corridor. The camera pans slowly into the shadows, where the smoke from a pistol barrel swirls in the red light. Something is moving in the dark, something angry. Out of the gloom stepped a ghost. It wasn't the frail, confused grandfather who had been asking for ice cream just hours ago. The man standing in the shadows stood with his spine rigid, his feet planted in a perfect combat stance. In his hands, he held a stolen Beretta 9, his grip firm, his knuckles steady. The cloudy confusion that usually swam in Elijah's eyes was gone, burned away by the pure, crystalline clarity of adrenaline. Medical experts call it terminal lucidity, a final, fleeting surge of mental function before the end. But in that hallway, it looked like a resurrection. The dementia patient was gone. The veteran of 1992 had returned for one last tour. Kang blinked, his gun wavering. The old man. "Contact front," Elijah barked, his voice booming with the command presence of a drill sergeant. He didn't just speak, he ordered. "Suppressing fire, left flank, boy, move." Elijah squeezed the trigger. Pop, pop. It was a professional double tap. The mercenary nearest to Junho crumpled, clutching his leg. The distraction was the split second the devil of soul needed. Junho didn't need a gun. He was the weapon. As the mercenaries turned their weapons toward the unexpected threat, Junho surged forward. He was a blur of violence, a hurricane in a tailored suit. He grabbed the barrel of the nearest rifle, snapping the soldier's wrist with a sickening crunch, and used the man's body as a human shield against the incoming fire. "Get down!" Elijah roared, firing cover shots that kept the remaining mercenaries pinned behind the pillars. Junho moved with terrifying efficiency. He swept the legs of one attacker, drove an elbow into the throat of another. It was brutal, close-quarters chaos. In under 30 seconds, the hallway was a graveyard of groaning men. Kang, realizing the tide had turned, fired a blind volley and scrambled into the darkness of the service stairwell, abandoning his squad. Silence returned to the corridor, heavy and smelling of cordite. Junho stood amidst the carnage, chest heaving, blood dripping from his knuckles. He spun around. "Maya, are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she sobbed, trembling against the wall. "I'm okay." They both turned to their savior. Elijah was still standing, the smoking gun hanging loosely at his side. He looked at Junho, his eyes bright and clear. He offered a tired, proud smile. "Good form, Private," Elijah whispered. "You remembered your training." Then the gun clattered to the floor. Elijah's knees buckled. He didn't just fall, he collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. "Halmoni!" Junho screamed, diving to catch him before he hit the marble. He tore open Elijah's pajama shirt, frantically searching for a bullet hole. There was no blood, but Elijah was gasping for air, his hand clutching his left arm, his face turning a terrifying shade of ashen gray. It wasn't a bullet. The stress of the battle had been too much. His heart was giving out. The heavy steel door of the panic room slammed shut, sealing out the chaos of the hallway. The silence that followed was suffocating. The room was a cold, reinforced concrete box designed to survive a nuclear winter, but right now, it felt like a tomb. Junho gently laid Elijah onto the cot in the corner. The old man was unconscious, his skin clammy, his breathing shallow and rattling. "Stay with him," Junho ordered Maya, his voice tight. He checked the monitors on the wall. They were dead. Kang had cut the hard lines. They were blind. The intercom on the wall crackled to life. A voice, smooth and venomous, filled the small space. "Open the door, Junho," the viper purred. "Or I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down." Junho stared at the steel door. He could hear the faint, rhythmic beeping on the other side. Plastic explosives, C4, enough to turn the blast door into shrapnel. He looked back at the cot. Elijah didn't have time for a siege. He was dying. If the door blew, the overpressure alone would kill him. If the Viper came in, they would all be slaughtered like cattle in a pen. Junho ran the calculations in his head. There was 0% chance of winning a firefight in a 10 by 10 box with 2 civilians behind him. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and tossed it on the floor. He loosened his tie. "What are you doing?" Maya whispered, her hands pressing a compress to Elijah's chest. "I'm ending it," Junho said, walking toward the door. "If I go out there, he'll focus on me. It buys you time. Maybe he lets you walk." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was the only card he had left to play. He reached for the manual release lever. "No," Maya scrambled up, grabbing his wrist with a strength he didn't know she possessed. Her eyes were fierce, blazing with the same fire her grandfather had shown in the hallway. "Get back, Maya," Junho warned. "He didn't save you 30 years ago so you could die today," she screamed at him. "He spent a lifetime looking for you. If you walk out that door and die, everything he did, every letter, every scar, it means nothing." Junho froze. His hand hovered over the lever. Beep, beep, beep. The beeping on the other side accelerated into a continuous, high-pitched whine. "Get down," Junho roared, tackling Maya and covering Elijah's body with his own. Boom. The world turned white. The blast tore the heavy steel door off its hinges, sending it flying across the room like a piece of paper. Smoke and concrete dust billowed in, thick and choking. Through the haze, the Viper stepped in, a gold-plated desert eagle in his hand, a cruel smile plastered on his face. "Knock, knock," he sneered, raising the gun to execute the survivors. But his smile vanished. He lowered the gun, squinting through the dust. The cot was empty. The floor was bare. The panic room was completely empty. The Viper kicked the overturned cot, his face twisting in confusion. The room was empty. He looked down at the floor. Beneath the rug lay a hairline crack in the concrete, a trapdoor. The Tunnel of Ghosts wasn't a myth. It was a Prohibition-era escape route built by the mansion's original owner, a route only the master of the house knew. Junho hadn't just escaped, he had flanked them. The power was still out. The mansion was a labyrinth of shadows, and now the hunters were the prey. One by one, the mercenaries began to vanish. A guard patrolling the library heard a floorboard creak. He turned, and a hand dragged him into the darkness. No scream, just the sound of a neck snapping. Junho wasn't fighting like a gangster anymore. He was fighting like the monster they accused him of being. He moved through the walls, using the secret passages to dissect the enemy squad. Lieutenant Kang was alone in the East Wing corridor, his flashlight shaking. He spun around, firing blindly at shadows. "Show yourself!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "You wanted my crown, Kang." Junho's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Junho stepped out of the darkness behind him. He didn't have a gun. He didn't need one. He kicked the weapon out of Kang's hand and grabbed the traitor by the throat. "I gave you a life," Junho whispered, lifting Kang off his feet. "Now I take it back." The fight was brutal and short. Junho didn't use technique. He used pure, unadulterated rage. He left Kang broken on the floor, a warning to anyone who dared bite the hand that fed them. Junho straightened his tie, wiped the blood from his lip, and walked toward the main hall. The final boss was waiting. He pushed open the double doors. The storm outside flashed, illuminating the room in jagged bursts of lightning. The Viper was standing in the center of the hall, the exact spot where Junho had knelt days ago. But he wasn't alone. He had found the tunnel exit. He had Maya. The Viper held a serrated combat knife to Maya's throat. She was weeping, her knees scraped and bloody. "Drop it!" the Viper screamed, pressing the blade into her skin. A trickle of blood ran down her neck. Junho froze. He had a clear path to rush him, but at this distance, Maya would be dead before he crossed the room. The Devil of Soul was checkmated. He raised his hands, surrendering. The Viper grinned, sensing victory. "Say goodbye to your maid." "Junho." He prepared to slice. A heavy wooden cane whistled through the air, and smashed into the viper's ankle with the force of a sledgehammer. The bone shattered. The viper screamed, collapsing to the marble floor as his leg bent at an impossible angle. Behind him, lying prone in the shadows of the doorway, was Elijah. The old soldier had crawled on his hands and knees, fighting through a failing heart to deliver one final strike for his family. Junho didn't waste the opening. He moved like a phantom. Before the viper could raise his weapon, Junho was there. A single, decisive motion ended the reign of the rival lord. The knife clattered to the floor, echoing in the sudden silence. Maya rushed to Elijah, weeping as she checked his pulse. It was faint, thready, but it was there. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew louder. The cleanup crew, paid for by the city's corruption, was coming to wash away the sins of the night. But for the first time, Junho wasn't thinking about the law or the business. He was kneeling beside the old man, gripping a callous hand that had saved him twice. 3 months later. The blood was scrubbed from the marble. The bullet holes were plastered over. The mansion didn't look like a war zone anymore. It looked like a palace. Sunlight streamed through the repaired windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The atmosphere was lighter, cleaner. The heavy oak doors swung open, admitting a line of 10 trembling young men, new recruits. They kept their eyes on the floor, terrified to breathe the same air as the devil of soul. They walked into the great hall and dropped to their knees in unison, their foreheads touching the cold stone, waiting for judgment. Junho sat in his black leather chair, looking every bit the emperor of the underworld. But the recruits' eyes drifted. Next to him, on a custom-raised platform that sat decidedly higher than the boss's own seat, was a plush, beige recliner. Elijah sat there, wearing a fresh cardigan and sipping chamomile tea from a delicate china cup. He looked down at the terrifying gangsters prostrating themselves and chuckled, shaking his head. Junho stood up. The recruits flinched, bracing for violence. "Raise your heads," Junho commanded. They obeyed, their faces pale. Junho didn't look at them. He pointed to the old man sipping tea. "There is a new rule in this house," Junho said, his voice carrying the weight of iron. "Rule number 1, you do not bow to me first, you bow to him." The recruits blinked, confused. "This is the patriarch," Junho continued. "If he does not like you, you do not exist. Do you understand?" "Yes, boss," the recruits roared. "Yes, grandfather," Junho corrected, his eyes narrowing. "Yes, grandfather," they shouted in unison, bowing deeply toward the recliner. Elijah leaned forward, the ghost of the 1992 riots twinkling in his eye. He looked past the bowing men, directly into the camera lens. A small, knowing smile played on his lips as he winked. "Family isn't blood. It's who bleeds for you.